All right. We're going to start talking about size and scale because we're moving from, we've already started talking a little bit about that now. Once you have more than one object on the page, you have to address how each object relates to one another. And that's true for type next to each other and interacting with each other. So size and scale is very important as we started talking about this week. So here's an example about looking at the perceived size of a typeface. These are all 32-point typefaces, each one of these. We have Scala Pro, Interstate, Bodoni, and Mrs. Eves. When two typefaces are set in the same point size, one often looks bigger than the other. And the reason that is the differences in X height, line weight, and width affect the letter's apparent scale. So looking at this example, they're all 32-point, but clearly we don't measure type by X height. X height is not how we measure type. Who can tell me what X height is again? We're talking about X height here. What is X height? What does that mean?
Isn't it typically based off literally the height of the X or the lowercase?
No, it's not. It's based off the lowercase, but it's based off the two spaces, the mean line and the baseline. The space between the mean line and the baseline, which is the lowercase letters, is the X height. But notice these all have a different X height, even though they're all 32-point. Why do you think that is?
Is it because the stroke thickness is different?
You would think, but that isn't it. But you're right, all of the stroke difference is different, but that isn't what's making it a different X height. Part of the design of the letter forms, we're looking at Mrs. Eves, which is based off of, who can remember what typeface was that based off of?
Is it Baskerville?
That's right, Baskerville, good memory. It's based off of Baskerville, so that 16th century typeface. And we have Interstate, which is similar to what kind of typeface does that remind you of? Who can tell me what that kind of reminds them of?
Like Helvetica?
Right, it's kind of has some elements of Helvetica. Look how tall Interstate is, and Helvetica also has a very tall X height. But then again, look over here at Mrs. Eves and how short the X height is. So X height can be anything the designer wants it to be. It can be tall or short. And that has nothing to do with the overall size of the typeface. That's just a style decision. It's a style decision. Okay, so the X height of a typeface affects its apparent size. It makes it look bigger. So in other words, Helvetica looks much bigger than Mrs. Eves set in the same point size. Its space efficiency and its overall visual impact, like hemlines and hairstyles, everything goes in and out of style. Bigger type bodies became popular in the mid-century, hence Helvetica, which was like the king of the mid-century design era. And Mrs. Eves, which came into being in the 90s, when we were doing all that grunge typeface design, and we were kind of getting back to basics with Baskerville, and they were looking at more calligraphic and humanistic design. So Mr. Eves and Mrs. Eves have this small X height, and it's the idea of purely a style decision. The world, we're talking about scale, and we're going to come back to how we measure typefaces in a minute. But the scale is another way we look at scale. So one way is through X height. X height is how we look at scale. Another is relationships between different type on the same page. So on the left here, you see the world is flat, all the same size, and she's calling it a type crime. Minimal differences in type size make this design tentative and arbitrary. It's not the same size. It looks it. But if we look closely, we can see the and is flat is smaller than world, but it's so minimal. We don't even register it. You really have to have a lot of contrast, a strong contrast between type sizes to really give it dynamic, decisive, and really make a pow, you know, with the word world here. It really makes it jump, pop. Pop is the word I'm looking for. So scale is another relationship between elements and their context. So here, for example, this is a small book. You can see by the size of the hands, this is a tiny little book, maybe a 4x5, but you can see how big the type is filling that page. So it's really big type on a very small page to really give it, again, some dynamic interest and a lot of pop. Another aspect of scale, using an infographic. So here's a design, a series of posters for the United Nations offices on drugs and crime using typographic scale to compare drug treatment programs, HIV incidents, and other data worldwide. This is a simple world map from country abbreviation codes. And the note Russia's high incidence of HIV and low availability of addiction rehabilitation programs. So it's kind of showing infographics using the 3 letters of the country code and putting it on a map. So it's really kind of using scale, arrangement, alignment, all to make a point and communicate a very important message. All right, so more about spacing. And we're going to look at leading, which is the space between lines. So from baseline to baseline is how we measure leading. This is going to be really important when we start using our type ruler, because we're going to be looking at leading, and we're going to be using this ruler to help us measure. So baseline to baseline, every line of type sits on a baseline. And so it's the space between lines that will be important to know. All right. We call it leading in a reference to strips of lead that we were using to separate lines of metal type back when we were using movable type. So we also refer to it as line spacing now that we're in the digital age, but you might still we use those 2 terms interchangeably. Both line spacing and leading are both used. So here's an example of the same type size, Universe 55, and it's set 3 ways. So it's 12-point type, which is the left number down here. And then you see a slash. It looks like a division equation. And then 10. 10 is the leading, 12 is the point size. So here we have 12-point type over 10-point leading. Here we have 12-point type over 15-point leading. And then here on the far right, we have 12-point type over 25-point leading. So go ahead and tell me, which one would you like to read? Yari.
Sorry, I had a question.
Oh, sure, go ahead.
So the 12-10, you've probably gone over it before, but like when you're submitting something to like a client, what is the like full format that you would send? Because I know we're going over like points and leading now, but just like for reference.
Right, no, you would, it would actually look just like this. It would be 12, it's 12 over 10 is referencing 12-point type over 10-point leading. You don't have to put point because it's a given. So just 12/10 is how you would spec the leading, the point size and leading for that paragraph of copy if we were setting copies.
Oh, so it would just be those 3 pieces of info then, the typeface and then 12/10.
Right, you would say universe 55 is the typeface, right? Universe 55, 12/10.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Sure. Now, if it's bold or italic, you would put that universe 55 bold or universe 55 italic or whatever, you know, whatever version it is. But if it's just the regular, which is what this is, it's just universe 55, 12/10. So look at these closely. Oh, hold on. I didn't mean to switch screens. What do we think? Which one, and you can put it in, let's put it in the chat. I want to have take a little poll with everybody. Which one of these 3 would you want to read? Which one do you think is the best legible? Like if we were to read a book, which one would be the one we want to read? Let's get everyone's vote. Okay, it looks like everyone voted. I don't see everybody here. So no one, it looks like, is saying, let's go ahead and read 12/10. I think we're all in agreement that that looks pretty painful to read, right? So here's something to always keep in mind when we're setting type. The point size is always the smaller number. The leading is always the bigger number. Never, ever, ever is leading a smaller number. So 12/10 would never happen because look what happens. The ascenders and descenders bump into each other. And the higher the X height, the more severe it is. So you would never have 12/10 or 12/9 or 12/11. And you honestly don't even want to have 12/12. You don't ever want to have it be the same number or less because of this. It's impossible to read. It bumps into each other. It makes a mess. So good job. No one chose 12/10. So now the debate is 12/15 or 12/25. So 12/15 is 3 points larger than the point size. 12/25 is almost double the point size, a little bit more than double. So think about it. When we're reading, think about your brain and think about when you're reading, what happens? Have you ever read something where your brain keeps rereading the same line over and over again? Has anyone ever had that happen? Where all of a sudden you're reading something and you keep rereading the same line over and over again. Has that ever happened to any of us? Yeah?
All the time.
Right. And do you want to know why that happens? It happens when 2 reasons. There's 2 ways it happens. And designers are in control of solving this problem for us. One is too much leading, too much space between the lines. Your eye loses track and it can't connect. And so it's happening in your brain. You're losing track and you have to keep rereading the same line because your eye is getting lost. So too much leading will do that, or too long of a line length. Too long of a line length. And your eye loses track and keeps rereading the same line because it can't track where it's going. It's too long of a line length. So those are the 2 things that happen. So now that I've told you that, what do you think is the perfect ratio for reading? That's right.
Yeah, 12/15.
12/15, exactly. 12/15. Your kind of your rule of thumb to start with. It doesn't mean it's always going to be this way, but I would always start with 3 points more than your point size. So if you're 12 points, start at 15. Now, the X height is going to determine, it might be 2 points if it's a high If it's a low X height, you might only need 2 points. If it's a high X point, you might need 4 points. But 3 points is always like kind of that happy place to start. So the best rule of thumb is to say my point size plus 3 points is the leading. Okay, so 12 and 15 is actually the best one to read here. Now, there's not to say we never do a double space leading. And obviously, you know, you guys have written research papers and stuff, and a lot of times your teachers want you to do a space and a half or two double spacing, but it's not great for reading. You are much better off with 3 points difference. Okay, kerning. Kerning is the adjusting the space between just 2 letters, not the whole word, just 2 letters. And so when we're working our next assignment, we're going to be working with just 1 word. And so kerning is going to become a big part of what we're doing in our next assignment. So I want you guys to all look at this very carefully. And I want you to look at the space between these letters. And in the chat, I want you to put the 2 letters that need their space adjusted. Type into the chat the 2 letters, and there's more than 1 set that need to be adjusted for equal spacing. Now, this isn't mathematic, this is optical. So it's how we see it. So go ahead and type in the 2 letters, and there's multiple sets that need space adjusted to look even. Okay, I'm seeing the V and the R. Wait, the V and the A, sorry. The V and the A, and I'm seeing the E and the R, AV, VE, RA, and AG, and GE, ER, RA. So everyone knows there are more than 1. There's more than 1. So those of you who are putting multiples are correct. There's multiple. There's not just 1. All right, good. I'm seeing some more. Oops. Okay, here they are. There were 4. So those of you who did AV, VE, RA, and AG, I don't know if anyone got all 4. Let's see, VE, AV, VE, AG. I don't know if anyone could, maybe, no, AV, VE, RA, and AG. Who was it? Sarah. Sarah, you got them all. Ding, ding, ding. Sarah got all 4. Good job, Sarah. Good, good. And so I'm going to go ahead and show you in the next screen how we adjust it. So there it is. There's the areas that we're going to adjust. And there it is adjusted. There they are. There they are adjusted. You don't want them touching. So the areas where the R and A were touching and the V and E were touching, that was a problem. And again, this isn't mathematical, it is optical. Yes, Yari.
Where the letters are touching, wouldn't that just be a ligature? Where, like, is that not acceptable in?
It's not a
this
ligature.
case?
What a ligature is a ligature is where they share the same stroke, not just touch closely. They literally share a stroke. So a ligature isn't touching. It's a new letter form that's sharing the stroke. So like the F and the I, the finial of the F becomes the dot of the I. Does that make, like, they share a stroke? They share a common element. So that's the difference between a ligature. So yeah. All right. So that's kerning. Tracking is the adjustment of the overall space between all the letters in the word, and it's equal. So whereas you can see we were adjusting just space between specific letters here, not all of the letters. Here, when we go into tracking, we track the whole word equally. And so these are the 3 types of tracking. There's positive tracking, which is opening up the word on the top where you're adding like double space between each letter. Zero tracking is what you type when you just type. When you just start typing and not adjust the tracking in any way, that's a zero tracking. And negative tracking is when you're minus, it's less than the zero tracking. You've adjusted it to be less. And so they're literally touching. The letters are literally touching to each other. But again, that's not making a ligature, it's just making them touch. You really want to avoid positive tracking and negative tracking. And I mean, eventually you'll be able to use them, but as we're learning the rules, and ideally you want to just stick with zero tracking most of the time. There are places for both, but for the most part, you want to just stick with zero tracking. Now, here's an exception to that rule. Tracking can be helpful when we use small caps. So at the top here, you can see that's just zero tracking at the top. And notice how they're bumping into each other. So adding positive, a small amount of positive tracking in the bottom row is very helpful with small caps. So that's one of the exceptions to that rule. All right, what are small caps? Speaking of small caps, they're designed to match the X height of lowercase letters. So like we've been talking in our Type Safari, as we've been reviewing Type Safari, I've been noting when I see fake small caps. Small caps are not just a capital letter shrunk down and changed size. It's actually designed by the designer to be working with the same stroke weight as lowercase letters. False small caps happen when you're in InDesign or Illustrator or Photoshop, any Adobe product. And let's say you chose Garamond, which has small caps. Adobe Garamond has small caps. You want to go ahead and choose small caps, okay? Because true small caps integrate peacefully with lowercase letters, as you're seeing in this line right here. Pseudo small caps are shrunken versions of full-size caps. So what happens is if you look at the word pseudo small caps, look how the weight looks thinner than the lowercase letters are shrunken versions. So pseudo small caps you always know because the weight changes. It becomes thinner. It's not matching the lowercase weight. Where on the top line, you can see the small caps that are designed to be small caps match the weight perfectly. Does that make sense? Can you see that? Okay, another thing to be aware of is numerals. We have 2 different kinds of numerals depending on the typeface you choose. Lining numerals behave like capital letter forms. So if you look at this paragraph of copy, you notice that the numbers sit on the baseline and go up to the cap line. They match the capital letter forms. So when you're doing a project that has a lot of numbers, you really want to think of what typeface you're using, how you want your numbers to behave in the document. Do you want them to behave like capital letters so they really stand out and don't blend in? That's when you'd want to use lining numbers. They act like capital letter forms. So just like as if you were putting something in all caps, that's how these numbers are going to act, like all caps. Old style numbers behave like lowercase letters. They have ascenders and descenders. So if you want your numbers to blend in with the copy, then you're going to want to use old style numbers. You want your old style numbers to blend in. They behave like lowercase letters. So therefore, they're not calling as much attention to themselves. And they, like I said, have ascenders and descenders, and they behave like a lowercase letter. And here they are side by side. So you can see Old style letters are on top and lining numbers are on the bottom. And this really matters, not for your everyday document, but if you're doing an annual report or a directory, like a phone book, or, something that's going to have like a financial document, something that's going to have a lot of numbers, you really want to know how you want those numbers to behave. You want to choose a typeface that has the type of numbers that you're looking for. And you have a choice, and be aware you have a choice. They are two different kinds of numbers you can be choosing. Okay, stacked letters. Another thing when we talk about spacing and legibility. So what do we think? We have all of these different varieties of ways to have vertical letters. How many of you, think about like the Chicago Theater, right? That's a stacked letter. Are they lowercase or uppercase? Who can tell me? I have one vote for lower with a question mark. They're uppercase. I was actually going to see if I can pull an image in here. Say Chicago Theater is all uppercase. So a vertical example of things like the Chicago Theater looks fantastic vertical. It's designed kind of in that very, it's a very specific look for these theater signs. So I think if you're going to go all vertical, the best way, look at which one's easier to read. Is buildings, the word buildings easier to read in uppercase or in lowercase? Right, it's easier to read in uppercase. However, this is really a limited place you should use this. The much better choice for legibility is taking the word and turning it on its side. So you can go down from top to bottom, bottom to top, and then you can see there's examples here of sometimes having a secondary line of copy. And then at the end here, you can see there's like, they're going two different directions. So what do we think is the way we should maybe choose if we're going to have a situation of using vertical stacked letters? Any thoughts? I'm getting some people that are saying they do not like the last one. First one. Well, I think again, the first one has its use, but it's not in every place use because it's still not as easy to read as others. Fourth, third. All right. So definitely never, ever, ever do vertical lowercase letters. That's a type crime. Just don't do it. Avoid vertical capital letters too, unless you're doing a monumental sign for a fancy theater. There's very few situations that you want to use vertical stack capital letters even. But if you're going to do it with all caps. But ideally, you really want to use the word and turn it on its side. I think if you're going to do it as well, I think it's important to have the words stay the same direction. I think having them go two different directions is confusing. So I would avoid that as well. All right, good. Oh, I don't share, but I wanted to show you one more thing. Hold on. Let's see here. I have one more little thing I want to share with you, and that is here we go. Sorry, I made it not share and I want to get that back to you. Okay. So I told you I'd come back to the idea of how do we measure type then? If the X heights are all different, how do we measure type? So the typographer's M is how we measure type. It's a horizontal space that's equal to the type's point size, a vertical measure. So the M space for a 10-point font would be a 10 points of horizontal space, and the M for a 48-point font would be 48 points of horizontal space. So the font's point size is not its design, determines the size of the typographer's M. Let me show you. So a typeface is sized so all the parts fit within the M. That means the ascenders, the descenders, the cap height, the whole scaffolding. So an M is relative to the point size. So a 10-point M space is how the type is measured. The entire letter form, ascender, descender, has to fit within the M. So it's a square measurement. It's not a height measurement. And so, for example, the 10 on 10 M means that, obviously letters are all different sizes. So the whole letter form has to fit within that 10-point M space, height, and the widest letter width. So the longest letter height, top to bottom, and the longest and the widest letter. So usually they're like a W is closest to the M because the W is the widest letter form. So it's usually the width of a W and then the height of both an ascender and a descender. So you can see how if you have a long ascender descender and a short X height, you can still, that affects the size and the look of the typeface. So that's how type is measured, not by height. It's a square measurement. So obviously the width of letters vary, and they don't always use all of the 1000 M units. Oh, yes, Yari, go ahead.
Sorry, I have so many questions today.
Sure.
The M, does that include when there's like a swatch in the capital letter?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Oh, okay, so that would just increase the whole thing for the whole type.
Yes.
Got it. Okay.
We also measure kerning and tracking in M's as well. So kerning is an adjustment of space. We already talked about between the two letters. Tracking is for the whole word, all letters. But those are also measured in that M space. So M units is a square measurement, and all the letters are designed within that M space, as well as kerning and tracking. And so it's looking at that whole block of space. And so that really matters just to understand why. And the reason I even tell you that, we're not going to be designing our own typefaces, and you would obviously need to dive much deeper into the M, understanding how M measurements work. If we were designing our own typefaces, we will not be doing that. But you do need to understand that as a designer, because you need to understand why are all 32-point type not the same? Well, it's because they're not measured by the X height. They're measured by the square M. So that's what's the main takeaway from that. Right.